Spectrovision Radio.
Deep inside the Pentagon, there exists a very shadowy group called the Collins Elite. This group believes that aliens absolutely exist, but they don't believe they're aliens. They believe they are demons, and that these demons are actually orchestrating what we call UFO disclosure. And they're doing this with the intention of convincing the world that there is an imminent alien threat and that we're all in danger. And our best bet for survival is to unite under a centralized one world government. But here's the kicker: that centralized one world government is going to be led by, you guessed it, the demons. And now they have all of humanity collectively and voluntarily under their thumb. Complete control over Earth. Finally, they did it. But the Collins Elite have a plan, so don't worry. The Collins Elite plan is essentially to create a Christian theocracy, merging church and state, and essentially creating a militarized Christian fundamentalist nation in order to get more people to become Christians, to join the movement, and to change the spiritual tides in the favor of the good side, because they see this essentially as Armageddon, that this is the battle between good and evil, the battle between light and dark. And we need more people to join. We need more people to convert to Christianity, and that's what a Christian theocracy would do. And that this is how the good guys get more good guys to fight the bad guys. And in this fight, it's not man versus man. It's man versus demon, or man versus alien, or good versus evil. This is what supposedly the Collins Elite believe, and the Collins Elite are very influential within our government, and they are the ones that are the consultants, the think tank that share the philosophy outwards that the rest of the government adopts. So knowing this, it's very important to talk about it, because we're starting to see some very strange things unfold out there. And when you know this, and then you start watching disclosure, a lot of things start making more sense. So let's talk about it. Hello, friends. Welcome to another exciting episode of Conscious Observers. You'll notice that I'm inside today. Time change has got me off my game. It got very dark outside, so I'm recording inside, so just imagine I'm walking through the forest at sunset. So today's video is about the Collins Elite and about the changing tone and narrative of disclosure. Now, I started noticing that more and more people, influential people, powerful people like Tucker Carlson, people like, Anna Paulina Luna, sitting congresswoman, very prominent people are nonchalantly and openly, I'm talking about Danny Jones, Joe Rogan, Fox News, talking about how aliens are real, but aliens are demons. Now, this is a very interesting development, because as someone who's been following, I don't know if you say following, researching the UFO phenomenon and ufology, things like this, someone who is a contactee, someone who has had multiple spiritual and extraterrestrial, or whatever you want to call it, encounters and experiences. I've been very invested in this topic for a very long time. And for the longest time, you couldn't even talk about aliens or UFOs in any public place, unless, of course, it was like an alien themed convention or something, without being judged, ridiculed. Of course, if you went on the news or anything like that, they're going to play the X-Files music, and they're going to show the little green alien heads, and everyone's going to giggle. There was always what people call the giggle factor. As soon as you say aliens, it's the giggle factor. People don't take you seriously. People think you're crazy, or they ridicule you. But now, That has dramatically changed. Now people are talking about it very openly. Prominent people, presidents, sitting presidents, talking about it. And they're not giggling anymore. And in fact, we went from giggling to completely shifting the tone. We shifted the tone from aliens aren't real, and if you think they are, then there's something wrong with you and you need to get help, to aliens are real and they're demons. That's a dramatic shift, if you ask me. And it happened quick. We're not talking about decades, we're talking about years. And it's happening faster and faster. Marjorie, MTG or whatever they call her, she was just on all sorts of different things yesterday talking about how she's basically convinced that aliens are demons. She's just the newest one in a long line of very prominent people to come out and say this with no proof. Again, they have no proof, you know. And Paulina Luna, I really like her. She's funny. She's good at what she does, and I follow her on X and things, and she will just nonchalantly share all sorts of pictures of seraphim and like quotes from Dead Sea Scrolls and things like this, and she'll just draw the connection between aliens and demons in a pretty nonchalant way, because when she's pressed on it, she doesn't give a lot of evidence or even like supporting data that links these data points. Like, oh, I believe this because of this. A lot of it's just based on belief systems. That, I think, is a bit dangerous because belief systems are very limiting in your scope. They force you to think inside a box because you run everything through the lens of the belief system. It has to fit with the paradigm. And when you have a belief system, it's like when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. Whenever you are a particular religion, you're going to see everything through that lens. I've had many, many encounters with non-human intelligence. Let's just say that. Encounters that if I was religious, it would be very, very easy to say that they were angels for the good ones and they were demons for the bad ones. And that's how a lot of these people see it is if it's a good encounter, it's an angel, obviously. If there's a healing or a message delivered or any sort of a help, rendered, it's an angel. Thank you, angels. And then if something bad happens, if you have any sort of negative effect, it's a demon. And we look at everything through that binary, good, bad lens. And I think that that's just very short sighted because I believe that the phenomenon is incredibly complex. Now, having said that, there probably are negative beings and there probably are positive beings. And a lot of it has to do with our perspective, right? If you're a deer living in a forest and a human developer wants to clear that forest to put a TJ Maxx and a Bennigan's in, or I don't know. I just dated the hell out of myself. TJ Maxx and Bennigan's? Do they even have those? I don't even know where that came from. I don't shop much. I don't go out to eat much. Whatever new stuff people are building, say they tore down a forest and they put in a shopping center, a strip mall, and to those deer, those humans are quite evil. Like that's a pretty sadistic thing to do. You're going to tear down this natural habitat and kill all these woodland creatures to put in a discount store. I mean, come on. But is that human inherently evil for doing that? No. I mean, everything's got to eat. There is a food chain. So I think a lot of what we call good and evil is very relative and subjective. I do believe, and we're going to get into some pretty fun details here regarding the Collins elite and things. But I do believe that it's clear humanity is being manipulated now. Is that manipulation good or bad? I think that depends on how you look at it. I look at most things through the lens of simulator theory, meaning that based on this isn't just my belief system. I came to this understanding through lots of experience and lots of trial and error and lots of research. And so many things have backed up the fact that this seems to be what I call a simulator for consciousness development, meaning that our consciousness enters into this realm to learn and grow by using these physical avatars, these physical bodies, and these physical experiences that we have here on Earth. So Earth is this training grounds of sorts for our soul. So of course it's full of adversity and confusion and contradictions and all sorts of stuff, because that is what forces us to think bigger and to problem solve and to expand our awareness and our consciousness and our understanding of things. So it is a obstacle course by nature and on purpose. And I think that there are some entities, intelligences, whether it's the system itself or managers of the system, that do manipulate our reality, and they do it for the good of keeping the simulator effective at keeping us a bit confused, keeping us um, a bit uneasy, keeping us a bit contradicted, keeping us curious and guessing, never understanding truly where we are and what we're supposed to be doing. I believe that a lot of these things are intentional, and I believe it's part of the system. Now, having said that, does that leave room for some, you know, let's call it a negative entity or species to, obviously hack or manipulate the system? Yeah, of course. Of course. Is that happening? I would kind of be surprised if it wasn't, given the vastness of our universe. But I also think that there's protectors and there's guardians of this realm. Um, and I do think it's like a school. So in a school, you'd have teachers and you'd have admins and you have your school cop and security guards, and then you have all the different layers and everything. And even though you have some bad actors that are kind of trying to come in and do bad things in schools, you have protectors and that kind of stuff. And I really think there's behind the scenes people and all sorts of layers of this realm that we don't see. We just catch glimpses every now and then. And this accounts for a lot of what we call these battles in the heaven, this fight in the heavens between the good and evil. That's what you hear a lot of these insiders in the government talking about. I think they're just catching glimpses of our kind of our control system that controls and protects and manages this realm. But I don't think that they're doing it inherently for evil purposes. But it doesn't mean that there's not, let's say, evil entities trying to infiltrate and, have their way. Now, having said that, let's talk about what the Collins elite is, because this is a word that's been brought up a lot more lately. And it's very interesting because this started back in like 1940s, World War II or so, where, you know, it kind of goes back to Jack Parsons. So Jack Parsons was an interesting guy, and he was um, basically the guy who started NASA. He started JPL, and he was, a rocket scientist, and he was very much into the occult and very much into dark magic and very much into, like Aleister Crowley and those guys. And, Aleister Crowley, before that, had summoned, basically the first gray alien in the Western world. He called it Lamb. Um, Lamb basically coming from Buddhist Lama, which means guru, teacher. And his drawings, Aleister Crowley's drawings of Lamb, was a gray alien, a big head, like looked just like gray alien. And his when he was summoning, like literally summoning this guy, it came with all sorts of knowledge and insight, and that's helped him to build rockets and all this stuff. And it was really, really wild. And then so JPL went on to basically become NASA. And if you think about it, so NASA still has JPL, but they call it the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and they say that's what it always meant. But Jack Parsons started it. So it's very obvious that it meant Jack Parsons Laboratory. And Jack Parsons was a occultist, black magic, very wild person who was very much into creating portals and bringing entities, interdimensionals into our world through these portals so they could help him build rockets and that kind of stuff. And he was very open about all this. And he is a guy who basically created NASA. And the crazy thing is NASA still does all of these, ritualistic things. They're very much into the occult, very much into the occult, to the point where it's been told, Barack hasn't told us, but Obama was like when they would do rocket launches and stuff, they always do them on certain dates, and they have these crazy patches and certain names and stuff for rockets, and it's very, very weird and very occult-y. And NASA still does this, and Jesse Michaels did a great breakdown on it. But they would even have like presidents and stuff like stand in particular places and in very ritualistic manner whenever they're doing their rocket launches, and that is very, black magic occult based. This is what NASA does. You see their patches and their serpents and their snakes and their sorcerers and this kind of stuff on our rocket, like the literal logos on the rockets. And so people don't realize that the NASA is still, even though it came from, black magic and the occult, it still is. It's still rooted in that. So the Collins elite, so real quick, they're in the government. There's essentially two types of philosophy in the government. There's the philosophy that they both think that these extraterrestrials or interdimensionals or demons or aliens exist. Okay. Both sides of the government believe this. Now, there's the side that think that it's like Promethean, meaning, like, if you remember the story of Zeus and Prometheus, Zeus wanted to destroy humans, and Prometheus was basically like, hey, I like these humans, and he wanted to save us, and he wanted to give us fire, which could translate to technology. And he basically saved humans and wanted to see us survive and prosper. So great. Thank you, Prometheus. And so there's this Promethean philosophy within the government that these interdimensionals and extraterrestrials, whatever you want to call them, can help us by giving us information, helping us with technology and this kind of stuff. And they do it for the betterment of society. And then there's another side of this that thinks that they are demonic, that even if they can give us, technology, that there's strings attached. You have to sell your soul. There's some sort of a bad, kind of exchange that happens, and that we shouldn't do it. That's sort of the paradox within the government, is these two different philosophies. The moralistic, faction that's like, no, this is bad, don't do it, even if we get good stuff out of it. This is a spiritual battle. They're deceiving us. And then there's Promethean faction that says, hey, this occult technology and knowledge can benefit us, so it's worth the risk. And you see this playing out in our government. You see it playing out in our government agencies, like the NASA's of the world. And the Collins elite was set up after World War II to be our think tank within the government, to basically be the moral compass of our government and say, okay, these entities exist. Okay, these deities that go all the way back to ancient, esoteric teachings and religions and mystery schools and cults and all that. All these deities, beings that they talked about in Hinduism, they talked about in Buddhism, and they talk about in Christianity and Judaism, and all these religions, all those deities, those actually exist. All those things that we just think is lore and mythology, they exist. Oh my God, they exist, and they've been here for so long, and they've been guiding, and they've been manipulating, and they've been doing all sorts of things with humanity. So the whole government basically is in agreement that this all exists. Now, they're not in agreement of, are they aliens or are they demons? Are they angels or are they interdimensionals? Is it all of it? Is it none of it? That's where they're not in agreement. So the Collins elite was formed to be the basically ethical compass to help our government navigate through this disclosure process, because they know that this exists. And they thought, okay, maybe we should tell the world that this exists. Because, I mean, they have craft, they have materials, they have maybe bodies, they have all sorts of stuff. We're finding out from these whistleblowers and everything. And I understand, skeptical. I don't know if you can believe everybody and all this, but I mean, there's so much data. There's pictures, videos. I mean, so much testimonial from people that it would be pretty wild to think that they don't have something, some sort of smoking gun, something. And they have, hired, they have got these teams together, like these institutes, to come in and say, to basically audit the information and the stuff that the government has. And they've said, okay, tell us if we should release this to the public. And they run these simulations, like these war game type things. Say, okay, what would happen if we told the public about this? Because part of the government wants to tell the public. And then every time they do these little simulations, they basically discover that if they were to tell the public, we're just not ready at a societal level, and it could lead to a societal breakdown. It would lead to, obviously, like, no one would go to work, and you know what I mean? Like, so people don't go to work. It's not just, oh, you can't go to the grocery store and get your food, or you can't go to Starbucks to get your latte. It means, no, you can't fly an airplane. You know what I mean? Like, people stop working at the, like everything, like the water treatment plants and, the farms. So all of a sudden the whole, economy collapses and society collapses is very bad. So then they just sat on it. They don't know how to tell people. So, but they definitely, want to get it out there, because the Collins elite people look at everything through this very religious lens. Okay, they're very, very religious. The Collins elite think that the best way to counter the alien takeover or the demonic controllers of our realm is through this Christian theocracy, which means basically trying to create like Christian nationalism, like make America this militarized Christian, you know, powerhouse that gets so many people on board. It creates this like wave, this spiritual, wave, and kind of balances the power because they see from what I've heard. Okay, they don't come out and just say anything. They're a very mysterious, shadowy group. This is from like Nick Redfern wrote a book called The Final Event, I believe, in 2010, that goes in depth with some insiders from the Collins elite that basically were suggesting and saying, and there's all sorts of other material you can find of people saying the same things and researching this, but they don't come out and talk about it. They say they don't even exist. And it's probably taken some other form. They don't even call themselves the Collins elite. This is just the name that was given to it back in the 40s. Who knows what they call themselves now? But that they believe that the disclosure process is actually being facilitated by the demons, the bad guys, okay? And that they're trying to get everybody to believe that they're in danger to an alien invasion and that we have to come together into a one world government so that we can protect ourselves from this external threat, and that one world government will actually be secretly run by these demonic forces. So boom, they got us, right? And that this Collins elite thinks that the best way to counter this is through, a religious battle, basically summoning Armageddon, this battle between light and dark, good and evil. Now, it gets really wild because America's not alone in this way of thinking. Basically, every major religion has an eschatology of end times, like a script for for basically what's they're all acting it out, almost as if it's like an instruction manual. If you look at like Christianity, obviously we have like the system of the beast, the mark of the beast, and the whole false prophet. I mean, they all have this like deception narrative, which is really um, funny because I'll get to this as I bring in the simulator theory of why that would be. But every one of them basically has this like deception factor where, okay, even if something happens, you can't believe it, right? Because it might be the deception factor. And I think that's really interesting because even if there was this mass event, say there was just this mass sighting of UFOs or spiritual apparition or something, and millions of people saw it. Well, the Collins elite think that the bad guys would use this to unify everybody into the centralized, power so that the one world government can take it over. But I think it would do the opposite. I think it would actually shatter everything because each religion is going to have, say, just for example, Christianity. If there was a worldwide, sighting of UFOs, you're going to have some people look at that and say, okay, well, more of a secular view, like, oh, UFOs exist, of course. So, it's a big universe, and God and the Bible allow for that, right? And then there will be people that say, oh, that must be the second coming of Jesus. And there's going to be people that say, no, those are demons. It's deception. They're deceiving you. Don't fall for it. So you're going to see all of these different like conflicting ideologies, even within the same religions, within the same countries. And then knowing that every religion around the world is going to do the same thing, I think it would actually be a very effective vehicle for dismantling and destroying the religious control system on Earth. So I'm just going through possibilities here because I don't the scenario that I laid out at the beginning about how this Collins elite seems to see this disclosure as a fake disclosure. Like literally, the UFO disclosure is being run by the aliens for purposes of taking over Earth. I don't really see that because I think it would completely backfire, and I'm sure they're smarter than that. I have a different theory of what's going on here, but if you look at all of the different religions, you go into like Buddhism and they have like changing. I mean, one common thread in all of them is that there's basically a dark period followed by a light period, and there's like a transition. Like Hinduism, obviously it has like the Yuga systems, and we're coming at the end, I believe, of the Kali Yuga, and then we enter into another one. You have like in astrology and stuff, we're entering into Age of Aquarius, and even in like Christianity, after Revelations and everything that happens there, the battle of good and evil, you enter into the 1,000 years of peace and peace on earth and heaven on earth. I mean, and so you go from a dark period to a light period. And Judaism, they have probably the most dramatic with the whole battle of Gog and Magog, where they basically their eschatology is that you know the whole world comes down on Israel, and it's like basically a world war versus like the world versus Israel, and that God comes in and saves Israel and basically destroys everybody that's against them. Um, and they're using it kind of as a blueprint to act things out, which I don't really think is the purpose. But here's where it gets really interesting. All of these different religions, okay, and I'm not religious, but I like to study religions just because it's interesting. It's like a peek into human nature. They all have these like prophetic, you know, like end time kind of scenarios. So a couple things could be happening there. Either they are getting all this information through, I don't know, like divine download, like through prophetic, encounters, being given this information of the future, or they're telling us things that happened in the past. And if all of these different religions from all these different cultures are saying these things, and it's actually staggered through different time periods, so it's not all written at the same time, and they're describing these situations that seem to be these kind of resets, this sort of battle between good and evil, a kind of a collective event. And it seems to be in the past, but they're presenting it as if it's in the future. Makes me think that it's a cyclical thing, meaning, okay, it happened before and they think it's going to happen again. Why would they think that? Well, maybe they know that it happened before that too. Maybe these are echoes of past resets. And maybe it's not a reset per se. Maybe it's like a universal archetype. What Carl Jung believes that the Armageddon is actually an archetype that replays itself at certain times. And I think the same thing is that it's a test for humanity. And if you think about it, if you think about, like how I believe that this is a training grounds for your soul, this is a simulator for consciousness development, that this all exists. I'm real, you're real, Earth is real. It's a natural biological place. But our consciousness, because this is a physical realm, our consciousness is not physical. So it has to enter into this physical realm to have these physical experiences. And that's why I call it a simulator, because you enter in to have these physical experiences the same way a pilot goes into a flight simulator to become a better pilot. Our consciousness comes into these avatars and has these experiences to evolve its consciousness. So our consciousness is non-physical, and we're physical here. And what we're learning through like plasma science, if you follow Professor Robert Temple and read like New Science of Heaven, his book, he talks about how most of the universe is plasma. And, other people like Ra Uru, the founder of human design, will tell you that 99.9% of all reality is non-physical and is made of neutrinos essentially. And basically what it paints this picture that we are, the atomic matter that we are, right? This organized atomic world that we're in is a very, very small part of existence. So it opens the door for lots and lots of different types of beings and intelligences, right? So even our physical universe is so vast. We can't even see the end of our physical universe. We don't even know where it begins and where it ends. We don't even know if it ends. And it's so vast, I guarantee you there's billions of intelligent life forms in our physical universe. And then to know that our physical universe is only 1% or so of the actual universe. Most of the universe is non-physical, and that doesn't even account for the interdimensions, like the intervening dimensions. In between all that, there are so many different dimensions. I've visited some of these. I know they're there. There's dimensions within dimensions. There's pocket dimensions. There's full layer dimensions. It keeps going and going. And then, so for like so many of these people just to say, oh, if you encounter a non-human intelligence, it's obviously either an alien or a demon. Like that's it. It can't be anything else. It's like, oh my God, it can be so many things, right? It's crazy how many possibilities there are, you know, and and it's just in all these religions. All right, so going back to the religions, they all have these deities. They have like angels, and they have demons, and they have gods, and they have different hierarchies of beings, and all this kind of stuff. And I think that they were just encountering these beings because they're all over the place. I mean, when you go out and you explore astrally, you run into all sorts of intelligences. And sometimes you have scary experiences. I've had scary experiences. And sometimes you have really cool, warm experiences. Now, if you're religious, you're going to look at that and say, ooh, I had a scary experience. That is a demon, or that is a devil, or that's some sort of a negative deity. And then you personify it and you give it a name. You make art out of it or whatever, and you say, this is a demon, you know, is it that, or did you have a scary experience? You can have a scary experience with a dog. Like imagine if you're, walking around a neighborhood at night and it's dark and a dog jumps out, it's going to scare the shit out of you. Is that a demon dog? No, it just was a scary experience with a dog. So we have to be careful about how we frame all these things. But whenever it comes to religion, people are very quick to just say something is an angel or something is a demon, and that's it. And it's really, it's interesting, but it's also terrifying how people can hang on these things. Now, the whole eschatology of religions is very interesting because if this is a repeating pattern, if these resets or these, I kind of think of say Armageddon, these end time things as like a boss at the end of the level. If this is just a boss at the end of the level, see how we navigate it collectively to see if we're ready. Like if this happens, like Carl Jung would say, this is an archetype that appears right before some sort of a transition. So we're about to take some sort of step, either technologically, spiritually, or consciously, or intellectually, and that this is like a filter. Okay, let's throw up the Armageddon archetype, and see how they react at an individual level. Like how do I react individually? This is a test. Kind of like when COVID happened. How did you react? Did you take care of your health? Did you say, "Oh, here is a health emergency, so I'm gonna make sure I'm in tip top health shape"? Did you treat your neighbors good? Did you treat your friends good? Did you lash out at people that thought differently than you? Did you form like sides and teams and factions? You know, so I saw a lot of people act in very different ways than I expected during COVID, and now we're getting like a bigger test. So imagine we're coming up to another breakthrough, another tipping point in our collective, and the system says, "Okay, how are you guys going to act if we simulate a alien invasion that can be taken, right? Because a lot of this is projection, a lot of this is consciousness based. That's why like five people can see the same thing. One person sees a glowing light and they think, it's an angel. Another person thinks, oh, it's an orb. Another person thinks, oh, it's just a reflection. You know what I mean? Like you can have one event and so many different perspectives on it, right? So say we have some sort of a big event. How's everyone going to react? How are you going to react individually, as a family, as a community, as a country, as a religion? How do we react? Do we eat ourselves alive or do we come together? I think that it could be the test of all tests. It's it really is like a discernment challenge, because even in the religions, they have all this stuff in there about deception. Do not be deceived, false prophets, false gods. It's almost like we can't even believe our eyes at this point because we're told, don't believe your eyes. So what do you believe? You believe your heart, but like religion has people believing that are kind of indoctrinated and pre-programmed to believe certain things. So whenever you see, like, let's say an alien, a lot of these people now, Tucker Carlson, Anna Paulina Luna, MTG, they are very religious. They're very Christian. So obviously they look at it and they say demon, Chris Bledsoe, great guy, met him several times, skywatched with him, called in orbs with him, really, really like him and his family a whole lot, very genuine people. They grew up very, very religious. He's had a lot of experiences with the orbs and stuff, and he says they're cherubim or they're angels. And who am I to argue? I don't know. But that's the lens he sees it through. Now, that attracted the government. The government paid a lot of attention to him and still does. So going back to the Collins elite and the government connection, if there's just some guy in the Carolinas who's seen some lights in the sky, why would the government care? I mean, people have experiences like that all the time. I've had many governments not knocking on my door, thank God. But they were very interested in him. Obviously, he had his encounter with the lady, which took it even further. But what it shows is that this Collins elite, which when he talks about all the different people that came to his house, all the different intelligence agency, representatives, they are representing the Collins elite. And they look at it through the same lens, that this is a spiritual battle between good and evil, and we have to get ready. And they look at Chris as somebody who can help them. Because if they just thought it was aliens, they wouldn't be doing the things they're doing with Chris. They don't think it's aliens. They think it's spiritual. And they think that it's very selective, that it doesn't it doesn't care about the masses. It cares about very specific people. Um, they don't know how it chooses and why it chooses who it chooses, but they want to know. They want to know more about it. And that's why they're so interested in Chris. Um, but it's just really interesting that the government would come in full force. I mean, NASA, and all the alphabet agencies, but even NASA was there. Like, why would NASA be at some dude's backyard who sees lights, right? So it really makes you think that they take this very, very seriously. And why are they taking it so seriously? Well, because I get the impression that they think that this is like end of days type stuff. And it's not just Chris Bledsoe. I mean, Dr. Diana Walsh Pasulka, she's written several books on this. She's a religious studies professor, and she wrote American Cosmic and Encounters, great books. And she really explores how UFOs mirror like religious traditional beliefs. And she even notes that the Vatican is very interested in UFOs, has special telescopes and huge archives on this, and they are extremely interested in the UFO topic, but they're very quiet about it. They don't talk about it at all. But behind the scenes, they're incredibly interested. And to me, that's very interesting because, they don't come out and publicly say that they believe in aliens and this kind of stuff, but they obviously are drawing connections between the aliens and demon, area. And that, it, there's something weird about the fact that all these agencies, governments, and religious groups are incredibly involved and interested in this topic, but they're incredibly tight lipped as well. It makes you wonder if either they know some things that are scary and they don't want to say, or they're completely confused. They don't want to say that they're just completely confused. Or if it's just like a Cold War type thing. If you remember in the Cold War, everything was incredibly secretive because we didn't know what the other people were doing and they didn't know what we were doing. And no one wanted to let anything slip. And it was like, the less you say, the better. And I'm getting that impression with all this. And it's like, well, if we're just trying to figure out what aliens are, then you would think more communication, the better, right? Share information, share experiences. Let's get to the bottom of this. But you see the opposite. You see this tight-lipped secrecy and classified, like everything's compartmentalized and got to go into skiffs to talk about it and all this kind of stuff. So there's obviously something going on, you know? It's interesting. But here's the thing. Just because all that's happening doesn't mean that there's actually some like like sinister evil plot that they, because you get this feeling from certain people when you talk to in these secret programs and stuff where they are very like Lou Elizondo's famous somber thing. Oh, if I was to tell you what I know, it's very somber. And he was very dramatic with it. You know what I mean? And I'm not going to say that there's not like a somber element to it. There is definitely a humbling element to it when you realize that, humans are not in control of our airspace, not in control of our space, not the alphas on Earth, and that, basically everything we've been told is essentially a lie, especially about our history and our genesis and our place in the cosmos and that kind of stuff. Then yes, that's very humbling and that can be very somber. But the idea of like an alien invasion, right? This goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning, that there's this imminent threat and that the Collins elite is there to protect us, and that this imminent threat is going to manifest itself as like an alien invasion, but that's the deception. You can't trust it. It's actually demons, and that, we need to, band together as Christians, and this is a spiritual war. This is you know, the last great battle between good and evil. This seems to have played out so many times. All these different religions going back centuries and centuries, thousands of years, talk about the same type of a thing. And it makes me think that this is a test. That when you go back to simulator theory and the fact that this is a training grounds for the soul, and that different scripts and programs can be run, and it seems like they're run in cyclical nature. You look at past civilizations, you look at these monoliths, and you look at these ruins of these civilizations, it's very clear that there's been extremely advanced humans before, that there are these cyclical cataclysmic resets, that these end days types of religious battles seem to occur. I mean, like especially in Hinduism, I mean, there's some pretty wild battles, like sky battles and everything that went on with the devas in Greek mythology between like the clash of the Titans, and the gods and or the Olympians and the Titans. And I mean, you go through history. I mean, even like Mesopotamia and like Sumerian. When you talk about the Anunnaki and the battles there, and it's so dramatic. These battles between good and evil, and they talk about it as if it happened 2,000 years ago or whatever, thousands of years ago. They talk about it as if it's going to happen again. They're almost certain. Prophecies are always in the future. It's almost certain it's going to happen again. And they talk about it as if it had happened previously as well, which makes me think that these are cyclical things, which makes me think that it is a boss at the end of the level, which makes me think that this is a test. And it is a test not to see if we're strong enough to survive, Armageddon. It's to see if we can avoid the whole damn thing to begin with. That this doesn't have to be an instruction manual for acting out reality like you see these people doing. You see whole nation states and whole religious groups literally using whatever their eschatology is as a blueprint for how to operate for the next 20 years. And if we have every religious group on earth literally acting out their revelations and their end days simultaneously, that's not good for anybody. Can you imagine how the world would look if every major religion is essentially acting out Armageddon simultaneously? And now people can argue, okay, are the aliens, are the entities, the non-human intelligences, did they create religion? Like I interviewed Jason Reza Shirjani a couple weeks ago, and he is very adamant that our religious control systems are that. They're a control system, but they're actually operated by Nordics, or what we'd call extraterrestrials. He doesn't think they're extraterrestrials, but when you get into these aliens, these interdimensionals, what everyone's out there talking about, that's what this point of this video is about, is, are they taking advantage of, did they create religions to get people indoctrinated and controllable, so that then they could weaponize it and then they could get people to act these things out? Or did that stuff happen naturally and they're just stepping in and taking advantage of this and getting people to act out these end times events? Or is this part of a program, part of a script that the system that we're in, like if you do believe that this is a simulator, as I do, that is a simulator for development and growth purposes, and that one of the best ways to grow is through these extreme events. Okay. I've been told before that it doesn't even matter if your experience is positive or negative. The experience is what matters as far as consciousness growth. So if you're here simply to grow your consciousness and to evolve, every experience is good, even bad experiences, because you learn from every single experience. Okay. It creates qualia. It's your subjective conscious experience. And that it doesn't really matter if it's good or bad. It just matters that you had a very novel experience, because novelty is what grows you. And especially when something is very abstract, very hard to conceptualize, very hard to wrap your head around, when things are bizarre, when things are confusing, when things are contradictory, that's actually good for growth because it causes us to think bigger. It expands our perception, and it creates, more of this logical processing power and more intellect, because we have to, grasp things and sort of conceptualize things and process things that aren't typical and standard. It's like a it's like a cosmic version of neuroplasticity. It's like neuroplasticity on a conscious scale, and that what is going to be a bigger catalyst for growth and change than, at the same time, you have some sort of UFO or spiritual encounter. Every single person on earth is going to have an existential crisis. Every single person on earth is going to immediately think, what was that? What does that mean in terms of my belief system, in terms of my spirituality, in terms of my religion, in terms of my cosmology, how I think about myself in relation to the universe? What does this mean for the future? What does this mean for the past? What am I going to do next? It immediately makes you think of everything. Is this fake? Am I being deceived? Can I trust this? Are they here for good? Are they here for bad? Do I go through this with like a fear-based mindset? Do I go through this with a learning, growth-based mindset? Do we try to establish communication? Do we just say, hey, they're intelligent beings, we're intelligent beings, let's talk? Do we fight immediately? Do we fight with each other? Do I fight with you because you don't agree with me? Or do we come together and unite and try to work together? all of these things are going to play out simultaneously because when something that big, that existential, that just out there, I mean, come on, like it doesn't get more out there than what we're talking about here. We're talking about mass disclosure. And now mass disclosure has been kind of clouded and filtered by this whole ideology that aliens are actually demons. And it adds this whole layer of complexity to it. And can we even trust that? Because deception's been built into our subconscious programming. So now we have all these things we have to work through at an individual level, at a family level, at a community level, a country level, a religious level, and a collective humanity level. We have to work through all those different things while trying to essentially save our souls, while trying to eventually navigate this in a way that's the most ethical and morally just, while basically having nothing to base it on because this is completely novel. And if you look at this world, as I do, as a consciousness simulator, then that is the ultimate catalyst for change and growth. It's the ultimate boss at the end of the level. And I think that we've had this boss multiple times before in different epochs. Now, I don't know if it's a collective pass or fail, like meaning do we all pass or do we all fail depending on the actions of the many, on the collective, or is it at an individual level, meaning, if you handle yourself properly and you navigate this minefield in a, you know, responsible, ethical manner, do you pass? Is that where the whole like 144,000 comes from in Christianity? Is it like a frequency based thing? I like to think so. I like to think this is more of an individual thing. I like to think you get bonus points if you help the collective and help the whole. But I like to think this is an individual test. That's what all my experience has showed me. But it seems like this has happened before, and it seems like it's happening again. And I think this is very interesting. So, thought I'd do this video to put a different take, shine a slightly different light on this topic that you're going to be hearing a lot more of because this isn't going away. More and more people now feel empowered and feel like they can come out and they can all of a sudden draw this connection between UFOs and aliens. And you're going to start seeing sides. You're going to start seeing people say, no, it's aliens, or no, it's demons. You're going to see people say, no, it's angels. Well, I mean, if it's angels, doesn't it also have to be demons? You know what I mean? Like, can you just have good, or does it have to be good and bad? I don't know. These are all the conversations that are going to be had now. And I just think that navigating this is going to be the most important thing. So this is happening. Okay. Even if you think I'm crazy, even if you think aliens don't exist and demons don't exist and all this is just complete BS, that doesn't matter. This conversation is happening at the highest levels. This Collins elite team has been supposedly in place in the government for 80 years now? Okay, 80 years. Influencing the philosophy of the government and their decision making. So it's happening. And this whole Christian theocracy thing, as crazy as that sounds, I mean, Trump said that he wants to put boots on the ground in Nigeria because they're, persecuting Christians there, which obviously persecuting anyone's bad. But we're not going into all these other countries and rescuing people. People are being mistreated all over the world. But all of a sudden, he wants to use the military might of the United States to, for religious purposes. That's basically step one to a Christian theocracy. So we're not too far away from this stuff, I mean, NASA's been doing these occult, rituals with U.S. taxpayer money for decades and decades out in the public, and they just deny it and lie to your face. So the government already is in this sort of spiritual mindset, the spiritual battlefront. I think that they see things like when they do things out there in the world and it doesn't make sense to us. We're like, why would you go there? Why would you invade that? Why would you do this? They look at things through a totally different lens, I think, than the average person does. And I'm starting to see that now, and now it's spilling over into ufology. And I just don't want them to, I mean, I don't think, through my experience and what I know, that every single non-human intelligence is a demon, and that's an insane thing to think. And if you just start like classifying everything that way, I mean, I really think there's trillions and trillions of different types. I mean, look at our Earth. Look at the difference between a spider and an octopus. They look kind of similar. Look how different they are. That's just Earth. Think about how many trillions of species are on Earth, right? We haven't even found them all. We've been here a long time. So then look at the universe. It's so big we can't even see the beginning and the end of it. And then there's intervening dimensions in every direction that we can't even count. And to think that if something exists in non-human form is automatically a demon if it's good, or an angel if it's, or a demon if it's bad, an angel if it's good, I think that's such a short-sighted, narrow-minded way to look at things. And I think that's how people at the top of our government look at things. And I think that's concerning. So I thought I would throw this out there just to put my spin on it. So as you see people talking about this stuff, Tucker Carlson, Anna Paulina, and all these big names out there with huge audiences, that it doesn't hopefully scare the shit out of you the way they kind of want it to. Because, when you look at everything through this Armageddon lens, I mean, that's scary, right? But I don't think it has to be that way. I don't think this has to be a blueprint for our next 20 years. I think that this is a test. It's a challenge. It's a boss at the end of the level. And I think that we can navigate it without manifesting it the same way they did before. I think the goal is to do it differently this time. So don't use that as a playbook. Use it as a warning, okay, of a what not to do, right? That's how I see it. I'd love to know your thoughts. I know this is a polarizing subject, but please leave your thoughts and comments on this. I would love to hear them all, and share this with anybody that you think would find it interesting. Thank you for spending time with me. Love you all. I'll see you in the next video.